Hey, what's up, guys? This is Marseille, aka the Property Pastor, coming at you with another amazing real estate investing video. And today we're going to be digging into our current series, talking about how do you determine your investing vehicle? How do you figure out the type of investing vehicle in real estate that best fits you, that best takes advantage of your skill sets, that best takes advantage of your resources, right? What is the best, what's the best vehicle for you? So I wanted to do this series just to kind of do a broad overview of some of the different vehicles out there so that you can, if you're looking at getting started, right, you're in your research phase on your journey. I wanted to kind of highlight some of the pros and cons of each, some of the skills you need, and also give you some resources to help guide you along the way. So before we get started, today we're going to be talking about BRRRR. And I'll define that for you in a minute. But throughout the course of this series, right, we've been talking about wholesaling. We've been talking about buy and hold. We talked about fix and flip. We're talking about BRRRRs today. We'll also talk about some creative stuff like lease options, subject tos, and then we'll also talk a little bit about private lending over the course of this series. So I want to make sure you're checking in, make sure you tune in. But before we get started, please make sure that you take a few minutes to subscribe to the channel. Every single week we are bringing brand new content, and that content is aimed at helping you to further you along in your journey. I share my experiences. We document different deals, how we do analysis, some of the mistakes that I've made, some of the lessons I've learned, some of the successes, all of that stuff, right? So this channel is really designed to help you in your journey, to observe me and mine, right? Just documenting that process. And I've been investing now for about 3 years, and it's been a fun ride. So I think it's an amazing way to build generational wealth. And again, we just want to continue. I want to continue to bring you value and content every single week. So make sure you like and subscribe. So let's chop it up. Let's get into it today. Let's talk a little bit about the BRRRR strategy. So first of all, what is the BRRRR strategy? So BRRRR, right? That acronym is famously coined by Brandon Turner of the Bigger Pockets Group, and it basically stands for, the B stands for buy a distressed house. So similar to flipping a house, you're buying a distressed house. And then the R, the first R, stands for repair, right? So you're going to repair and upgrade that house, and then you're going to rent it, right? And this is where BRRRR differs from flipping, because remember, in flipping, you're buying a distressed house, you are rehabbing a distressed house, and then you sell it. Well, the biggest difference with BRRRR is that you buy it, right? Same distressed house, you rehab it, but then instead of you flipping it and selling it, you actually just keep it, right? So you find a tenant. So the second R means rent the house to a tenant. Once you have rented the house out, right, depending on your lender, you may have to have a lease in place for a while. You may have to owned the property for a certain amount of time, but now you can refinance the house, right? So I'm going to run through the numbers here in a second, but you can refinance the house, which, amazingly, is tax-free, and we'll dig into that here in a little bit. But then after you refinance it, you get your money back out, you get to repeat the process and start it all over. So in buy and hold, right, we talked about repeating that process of, purchasing a house, renting it out, and then repeating the process. But one of the problems with buy and hold is that you run out of money. But one of the beautiful parts about BRRRR is that you kind of recycle money, right? So it's very efficient. So let's look at some of the numbers behind this. So let's say, for example, we got a house that is gonna sell for $100,000, but it's in bad shape, right? It needs some work. Let's say, for example, it needs about $25,000 in work, and we are able to purchase the house. Let's say, for example, we got really good negotiation skills, or a wholesaler brings it to us, and we are now buying that house for $50,000. We put $25,000 in work, right? We paint it. We do a little bit of kitchen stuff, a little bit of bathroom stuff. We're able to pull off the whole rehab for $25,000. So instead of selling it for $100,000, we are now going to go put a tenant in the place. And at this point, we're $75,000 all in. And we can go, our options are sell, or our options are refinance now that we have a tenant. So when we refinance, the bank's going to give us 75 to 80% of the loan to value ratio, right? So what that means is that in our example, we have a house that is $100,000 ARV after repair value, but the bank will put a note on that house for $80,000. Now our tenant is going to take care of that note for us for the rest of the time. It might not be that particular tenant, it might be several tenants, but they're going to pay for it, right? So the bank is now paying us $80,000. And if you remember, we purchased for $50,000, we put $25,000 in, right? So we actually made $5,000. So when we refinanced out, we actually made $5,000. Now, I'm simplifying this. I'm not considering closing costs. I'm not considering, all that other stuff that comes with it. I'm just making the math easy for us today. But let's say, for example, when we go to the closing table at refinance, we have now walked away with $5,000. And let's say, for example, in this house, we're making $300 of cash flow with the new note, the difference between all the expenses and the income on the property. So now we got three wins, right? We have $5,000 in hand, we have a house, an asset, right? And we have $300 in cash flow. I'll take that deal every day of the week, right? So that's a phenomenal deal. As we look at this thing, BRRRRs are a really cool thing. And I tell people all the time, I do BRRRRs because I'm basically, instead of flips, because I'm flipping a house back to myself. And if I do it right, I get to recycle that money over and over and over again, right? So that's really nice, right? But BRRRRs are not they're not for the faint-hearted. Just like I talked about fixing flips, they take a certain amount of skill. I think BRRRRs take a lot of skill too. So let's look at some of the skills that you need. First of all, just like with flips, you got to be able to find deals. You got to be able to find deals. Deals have got to come to you either through your real estate agent, either through your direct marketing, or a wholesaler, right? So you got to be able to find deals. You got to be able to find leads. But then in finding those leads, you got to be able to tell if they're good or not, right? You got to be able to look and say, hey, what will this property refinance for? What's its ARV? What will it actually rent for once I get it all fixed up? What are its expenses going to be? You got to be able to figure out the numbers, right? So recognizing the numbers is a big piece of this. And I talk about BRRRR a lot of times. They got a lot of free calculators out there that we'll talk about at the very end. But calculators are important. Being able not just to calculate you punch your numbers, but recognizing what typical costs are, recognizing the different pieces of the project are going to look like. So in that, right, you got to be able to estimate what the project's going to cost you, what the rehab timeline is going to be, and all that kind of good stuff. Other piece of it is you might have to do some fundraising, right? You may be able to do the purchases, but you might have to find fundraising for rehabs, right? You might use OPM, right? Hard OPM is other people's money. So that might be hard money lenders. That could be private money lenders, either directly out of their pocket or through a self-directed IRA. You might have a partner, right? You might be doing crowdfunding. All of these things, you got to be able to find money to do deals. So in that, right, if you're going to do BRRRRs, the thing you're going to run into is, in our example, if you purchase for $50K, let's say that was your money, you borrowed 25, now you got $75,000 tied up. And if your project takes you 3 months, 6 months, that money is just tied up. So if you want to do multiple BRRRRs at the same time, you got to raise some money, right? You got to raise some funds. So fundraising is definitely a skill that you got to have. And just like flips, right? You got to be able to work with contractors, and you got to be able to work, and working with contractors is going to be important. So in that, right, the contractor piece of it is a big piece. A contractor can make or break your deal. You don't really have to work with realtors in this instance, but you gotta work with contractors, right? Contractors are key to your success. And I did a deal on a BRRRR I did down to the, it was the most extensive and expensive BRRRR. And I had some nightmares with contractors, and I learned a ton through that BRRRR, right? And, fortunately the deal was so good, I still came out successful, but I had project delays. I had a contractor who stole from me. I had contractors who didn't know their stuff. It was a lot, right? I learned a lot through that particular BRRRR. But you got to have the skill set to be able to work with contractors, set up contracts with them, set up estimates, set up bonuses, set up penalties, all of that kind of stuff. That all matters. So let's look at some of the pros and cons. And I think this is, really where it becomes important. So we talked about the skills, but let's look at some of the benefits and some of the drawbacks to doing BRRRRs. BRRRRs are actually my favorite investment vehicle. And the reason they're my favorite is because they are the most efficient way to use capital. And let me tell you why I believe they're the most efficient way to use capital. So as we talked about, we talked about flips in a previous video. One of the drawbacks to flips is the tax man, our silent partner, Uncle Sam, is going to get his cut, either short-term capital gains, long-term capital gains. He's going to get his cut, right? So from a tax standpoint, flips are problematic. But from a tax standpoint, BRRRRs are not problematic, right? So I think it's a very efficient way to use capital. And even in our example, we actually made money, right? How do you buy a house and make money? You make money by, it's almost like getting paid to buy a house. to me, that's phenomenal. Now, aside from infinite return on investment, which that's, another thing where it's like zero money down in a BRRRR, right? And that you get infinite return on investment here, infinite cash on cash return in the example we gave, right? But I think one of the nice parts about BRRRR deals is that you create cash flow and you gain an asset, right? And when it's all said and done, your cash on cash return is phenomenal with a BRRRR deal. So it is very efficient, allows you to recycle money over and over and over again. That's where the repeat side comes from. Your proceeds, right? When you refinance your proceeds, that is tax-free money. So again, remember when we are doing a flip, we are paying taxes. But when we're doing a BRRRR, our refi proceeds are not taxed. That is not taxed at all, not a cent of it. So that is a fantastic way. Now the thing is, you may be asking yourself, so if I can make 30, 40 grand from a flip, why can't I just pull that much money out of my BRRRR? The thing you got to remember now, if you pull too much money out of a BRRRR deal, let's say for example, instead of 100 grand, you got 130. But if you pull out, the whole 80% and your property is cash flow negative, that's not a good thing. Right. So what you want to be able to do is make sure you only pull enough cash out that your tenants can pay for. Right. So the property you still wanted the cash flow. Otherwise, you're going to have an upside down asset. Right. Now, you could still do stuff in the future, though. Right. Where you could you could use that money through cross collateralization. You could do a lot of other stuff through refinance for other things. Right. And just take that kind of hit and use it to buy other assets. Right. But, you want to just be careful if your first one, if you're going to create a negative cash flow on asset, that could be kind of problematic. But the refi proceeds are tax free. And I think there's fewer moving parts. One of the things I like about it is on the back end, I'm dealing with a tenant instead of a buyer. Right. So a tenant that's not going to care quite as much about every paint color. A tenant's not going to care quite as much about, do I have granite countertops? They're not going to care, quite as much. And the thing that's nice about it is if I'm competing with a flip, I can offer a little bit more because my expenses will be less during the project. So I can beat out some of the flip folks on the flip side of things, literally. So but I think there's fewer moving parts, so on the front end, you got a lot of stuff. You got to find the deals, you got to rehab the projects, all that kind of stuff. But on the back end side, it's not quite as problematic, from the taxes, from the selling side of things, it's not as many moving parts. And I think if you do decide to do flips, you're pretty much getting a good solid training ground with BRRRR deals, right? You're still going everything front end, and it's you can leverage it, right? So I can go and do flips, because I've been doing BRRRRs, right? So a lot of the upfront skill sets are one and the same. It's just pretty much on the exit strategy, things change up when you're doing a BRRRR deal. So that's some of the pros. And like I said, this is probably one of my most I love doing BRRRR deals. They're really nice. Very efficient, and it's fun, right? To kind of see a property in disarray come together, and that's a nice benefit. On the cons, what's the drawback, right? You can have holding costs due to delays, right? So if you are leveraged pretty high on the front end, if you're buying materials on credit cards or, your very first deal, right? It's everything riding on this thing being done by January, and January comes and goes. That could be problematic, right? I have a BRRRR that's way behind schedule right now with a hard money lender and even a builder's risk policy that I've got to renew. So my builder's risk insurance goes up. I'm paying a much higher, interest rate because it's a private money. Unfortunately, it's not a crazy private money deal, but I have higher holding costs. So that's definitely one of the cons. So a current BRRRR that I have is behind schedule. COVID delays, contract delays, all this kind of stuff. So there are definitely some drawbacks. It requires money. At the end of the day, it does require money. You got to get acquisition costs. You've got to get rehab costs, and that can be your money or it can be somebody else's. But it requires money to do a BRRRR deal, right? It takes money. There's some other things that you can do, like a rehab lease option. We'll talk about that, in a few videos to go down the road. But for the most part, a BRRRR deal requires money. To get going. The other thing is that it can be time consuming and it can be stressful. I don't think it's quite as stressful as a fix and flip, but it's still stressful. And it takes time, right? A rehab project typically doesn't happen in 2 weeks. So you're talking about months, right? You're talking about permitting. You're talking about through your city folks. You're talking about building materials being selected, picked out. You're talking about surprises, right? When they open up walls, is there termite damage? Is there rot? Is the HVAC unit that you weren't planning on replacing, does that have to be replaced? All of that stuff, right? It's just time consuming and it can be stressful. And I think the other piece is that the refinance amount depends on the appraisal, and it depends on what the property can cash flow at, right? So some of the cons, right? So if you're planning, an appraisal number of 150, but then for whatever reason your property only appraises at 100, you may have to bring cash to the table, all right? And let's say you do, right? If you bring cash to the table and you brought 10 grand, well, in the overall grand scheme of things, it was still a successful BRRRR if it was less than the 20 you would have bought outright. So I think that's, it's a con, but it's not, a deal breaker, right? So, but again, your refinance amount can depend heavily on the appraisal. So that's just some of the pros and some of the cons of BRRRRs. Like I said, I love BRRRR deals. They're one of my favorites. I've done several of them, and we'll do several more. But wanted to kind of just shoot you guys some resources. Like I said, I talk a lot about BiggerPockets. They're just for what you pay, in terms of when you actually do buy something. Like I said, it's free membership, and you really don't spend much money for the amount of knowledge that you get. You decide if you want to get a pro membership or buy some of their perks and things like that. That's really the only time you're spending money. But I think BiggerPockets is a great resource for BRRRR deals. They have a really nice calculator, which you can go on, and I think you can do like maybe 3 to 5, run analysis on 3 to 5 per month. And they've got Excel sheets that you can pull out, right, and all that kind of good stuff so that you can use. But probably one of the best resources I think that you should look at if you want to do BRRRR deals is a book by David Green, who's actually the host of the BiggerPockets podcast. And his book is called Buy, Rehab, Rent, Refinance, and Repeat. So again, Brandon Turner is the originator of he's not originator of the process. He just coined the phrase. But David Green wrote the book, and I think it's a really good resource. And it just walks you through, the financials. It walks you through the rehab process. It walks you through, the bank approval process, contractors, property managers, pretty much everything that you can run into just to get a good foundation for you. But that book, as you see, it's up here. You can probably get it, on Kindle Reader for like $12. You can get the hardbound copy for like $15. So just a great investment, right? Great investment. But you can find, guys on YouTube. Tarl Yarborough is really good. Just tons of folks out there who are doing BRRRR deals. And, like I said, a lot of folks are out there documenting their journey. You can check out my videos on the subject as well, and just kind of look at some of my lessons learned videos and whatnot. But I will continue to do BRRRRs. They're a big part of my portfolio, a big part of my strategy. So, hey guys, I hope that this video has been beneficial to you as you've been looking at the BRRRR process. If you do consider doing it, make sure you reach out to me, ask questions. In your local RIA groups. What I find is that you don't have as many folks doing these projects who are what I consider 20 and 30-year investors. A lot of those folks seem, at least from my experience, have been fix and flippers, and they have been buy and hold guys. But BRRRR is a really good way to take advantage, of some cool stuff in real estate investing. So if you got questions, reach out to me. I'll be more than happy and willing to answer them for you. Again, my name is Marseille. I am the property pastor. Thank you so much for tuning into today's video. Can't wait to see you guys again. Please be safe out there during the pandemic. Praying God's best for you and your family. Thanks again for tuning in, and can't wait to see you again. Take care.